We're practicing various stitches on the Corona knitting machine in this series. This time we're going to use a tuck stitch that's intended to create a decorative look from the purl side of the fabric. As a quick reminder, we're knitting a hat that will fit a toddler. It takes 100 stitches at about 7 stitches per inch measured in stockinette. And this kind of tuck stitch doesn't change the gauge from stockinette a lot. The pattern requires fingering weight yarn or the equivalent. I'm actually running 2 strands of industrial yarn side by side to create this fabric. For this hat, I want to make the tuck stitch show up from the wrong side so I can make a pretty, well, it's going to be the right side, from the purl side, I should say, so I can make a pretty pattern. This main yarn is actually a composite of 2, and it's still fairly thin, fingering weight. Therefore, I think I can get by with this automatic end weaving in method, whereby for the first few stitches, I've wrapped them around the end needle as though kind of folding the yarn around the end needle, then taken all the strands and wrap them E-wrapping around the next 3 needles. And then when this comes off of the machine, I'll be able to snip off the yarn tail without further ado because it's woven in. That technique works beautifully for thinner yarns, not so beautifully for yarns at the top of what the machine wants to knit, because asking it to knit off end stitches that are double thick is not always well received, and the machine can get cranky about it. So let me finish E-wrapping across, then we'll knit this hat. At main stitch -1, so stitch size 7 in this case, we'll knit 30 rows for the hem. This part of the process is identical to all the other patterns in this series. Here's our hem fabric complete. Now we'll hang these E-wraps on the working needles all the way across. By the way, I chose to E-wrap for the looks, but I didn't really have to, because I could have hung the first row of main yarn stitches and also gotten a closed hem. And I will show you that in another hat video. If you feel confident, you can take your 3-prong tool, pick up 3 at a time, and hang across faster. Makes it a little harder to stay away from your waste yarn though. And a heads up, I did not knit in a row of ravel cord because I don't mind snipping the waste yarn to release it. But if you would prefer to use a ravel cord, you may certainly do that. I'll work on across, and then we'll work on the body of the hat together when I'm done. As usual, I'm pushing the needles forward and knitting back from the hold position to get a good start easily. The SAM buttons both need to be set to A. The number buttons both need to be set to 10 so that we can work in groups of 10 across the bed. The T button is set to T. We'll be working without the needle markers, just counting off the groups of 10, because many people who have these machines don't have a set of needle markers. Let's begin with 6 plain stockinette rows. I almost forgot, 1 row won't really hurt. I should turn up 1 entire stitch size. So here are rows 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Push it back to B position. Now every 10th stitch should tuck, starting with stitch 5. And they did. When I look closely, it looks like this is the corresponding one. This is the stitch that tucked. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 will get me the same stitch tucking. 5 one more time. and 3 plain rows. This time I'm going to move the tuck stitches 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and select stitch 10. Looking for the stitch that tucked over here, it was stitch 2. And 10 one more time. And 3 plain rows. Using this method without the stitch guides or needle rulers, we are simply replacing them with our powers of observation. We're taking note of what constitutes a group of 10 on the machine and what number each stitch is. And we can do that by seeing the one that responded first from number 5 out of the group of 10 and then from number 10 out of the group. That's all the stitch guide is doing. And while it certainly makes it easier on us, it's not doing anything that you can't do by paying attention. Whether you use it or not, the machine is designed so as to respond to your selection in the first few needles and repeat that selection all the way across the bed. I've kept repeating the same pattern until there are 60 total rows knitted. This is pretty much all of the hat. In showing you, I've disturbed some needles. So we'll knit a few more rows just to finish the top of the crown without any tucking, because it's easier to gather off that way, and plus the wrinkles of the very top where you gather would hide any fancy effects anyway. So let's knit 6 plain rows. You may recall that the stockinette pattern included 56 crown rows. The one with tucking is going to include 66 total crown rows. Little trick, I'm going to go to stitch size 10, the largest size, for the final row. It won't show, and it will make slightly bigger stitches that are simply easier to get your gathering needle into. At this point, I can gather it straight off of the machine or scrap off, which is what I'm going to do. When this waste yarn is removed, we'll have a complete hem moving right into the tuck stitch and the gathered top of the crown. I'm leaving enough to use as the gathering thread, and I'll scrap it off and we'll finish it. Finishing consists of sewing the edges of the work together. The seam here is on the underside of the hat, so you can't see it from here, and gathering in the crown. If you're a newer knitter and you need help with the finishing, there's a whole video on the subject of finishing this entire series of hats.